Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. I've been doing this like maybe once a month for my colleagues to help out the education in finance, and in the future I have some, well, real estate is another one, and I will have some other talks in the future too. But today I have my colleague, Dr. Param Baladandapani here. I have known her more than a year actually. She's a radiologist.
Yeah.
She still practices. She's a mom of 2 young children. She's been doing this investment for a while for real estate in long-term rental and short-term rental. And actually she made a huge progress past 2 years, is that right? So actually she's semi-retired from her practice, and now she does education for physicians and professionals, and also she still practices radiology too. So today she also has a Facebook group called Generational Wealth MD. I think it has about 2,000 members in there. She also has a course, Generational Freedom MD. It's a very small group, intimate course that actually I took her course maybe 2 courses before. I enjoyed it a lot because the course is a very small size, and she actually offers some one-on-one consultation along the course too. So here she is today. She's going to provide some webinar about 3-step framework to financial freedom. Hopefully this is helpful for you, everybody. Do you want to take over, Ram?
Yeah, sure. Hi guys, thank you for making the time on a Sunday. I know Sundays are crazy. It's usually family time, so I appreciate everyone being here. I'm really passionate about this. Like Sujin said, I use real estate to get to financial freedom. And for me, this is just, I love doing this. I love sharing this information. I had a lot of frame shifts as I was going through this journey, and the whole point of these presentations. And I love what Sujin's doing. I mean, Sujin has been great in terms of educating people generally with finance. And kudos to you, Sujin. I know you do it with the stock market. You talk people through everything, and I like how you're doing this about real estate, because I feel like, especially for physicians, we kind of know what to do with the stock market, but with real estate, it's almost like a gray zone. People really have no idea. There's so much ambiguity over there. So I'm hoping to go through a little bit about what I've learned in my journey, and hopefully this helps give you little frame shifts and helps you think about investing in financial freedom differently. Okay, so I'm going to talk mostly about real estate right today. And so the point of the webinar was to help people who are thinking about real estate and don't really know that much, all the way to people who already have some real estate and are looking to scale. And I hope it's useful and has valuable information for everyone. And the way I like to think about it, and we'll start from the basics, but the big broad overview is, when you're thinking about something like investing in real estate, can be very, very overwhelming. And I want to start off with giving people like a simple 3-step framework, which is thinking about things in terms of, okay, what's my next step, and what are the other steps that I need to know to get to financial freedom with real estate, so that it simplifies the whole process, right? And you can give me feedback. Like Sujin said, at any point, guys, keep putting your questions into the chat box. We will try to take some breaks in between, and towards the end, we'll have time for Q&A, because this is very interactive. Any questions you have, just keep putting them into the chat box, and we'll get to them. So I like to say that the traditional retirement model is a little, it's broken, because it kind of relies on you working really hard, saving a lot of money, and investing in the stock market or retirement funds, which essentially means, and you hear this all the time when people say, how much do I need to retire? When will I be financially free? The answer is often, you need 25 times your annual expenses. So if I need $100,000 every year to meet my family's expenses, I need $2.5 million in a stock portfolio, right? And for most people, that means working hard and saving more till you hit 60. And I've come to realize that for a lot of physicians, that means burnout. It means being stuck in a job where you may really not have autonomy. You love medicine, not necessarily loving your job, but you stop doing it because you need to have that income that you then invest in the stock market. So you're constantly trading your time for money, trying to get to financial freedom, right? I mean, but that's why we say we're trapped by the proverbial golden handcuffs. And the question is there a different way to do it? And so a little bit about me. Like Sujin said, I'm a mom. I was a full-time radiologist in Southern California in 2019 when this picture was taken, 2018. And my journey was that I thought I was doing everything right. I was a saver. I had invested in the stock market. I was maxing out my retirement accounts. I was doing the backdoor Roth IRA. I had a brokerage account. I was investing in individual stocks, index funds. I thought I was doing things right. I even had a rental property. My first one, I ended up, after a lot of procrastination, purchasing in 2014. And I was actually saving my way to retirement in some ways because I had $500,000 in savings and I was very proud of that. But honestly, guys, for those of you listening, $500,000 in savings will last you 4 years if once you factor in inflation, if you even need $10,000 a month in saving in expenses, right? If you need that. So you really can't save your way to retirement. You have to invest. But 2019, the moment when I really understood all of this was 2019 when I had a rough career transition. I lost my job, found another job, but that made me really look at my financial independence numbers and look at how much I actually needed to become financial free and how far along I was. And that's when I actually did a lot of education. I took courses. I really educated myself. But just to give you an example, this is a retirement calculator that I like to use because it actually helps you plug numbers in terms of where you are right now, and it tells you how long to get to financial freedom. For those of you who are looking for this calculator, it is available on the generationalwealthmd.com website. If you go to resources, there's a link to the financial independence worksheet, which also has this retirement calculator in there. But just to give you an example, if you're starting from scratch, you're saving $2,000 a month, and you need $10,000 a month in income every month to be able to live off of it, which is your financial freedom number. That gives you annual expenses of $120,000, right? When you plug that in, the next thing you need to put into the calculator is what the ROI of your portfolio is. And what you have to understand, which I really didn't understand until a few years ago, was that although your stock portfolio typically has an annual ROI of 10%, and this is like national historic averages, right, over the last 70 years. So even though even if your portfolio is predominantly in stocks and it's increasing in value by 10% annually, what happens when you go into retirement is that you can only safely withdraw 4% of that. Once you factor in inflation, once you factor in asset allocation for market volatility, you can only withdraw 4% in retirement. Once you plug those numbers in, you realize that it'll take you 26 years to get to retirement, right? So this is just like a simple, I want to run the numbers to show you guys what it looks like. And you know how everyone says, well, you work harder, you take on more shifts, you save more, you live frugally, right? And that's how you get to financial freedom faster. Doing all of that, even if you doubled what you were saving and you bump this monthly contributions up to 4,000, with the same investment return on investment that you would have with investing in the stock portfolio, you can kind of take down the amount of time it takes you to get to your goals by 6 years, but that's about it, right? So you still have to do this for 20 years to get to financial freedom. And what happened for me is, like, once I realized, this was the first time I was learning about the 4% safe withdrawal. So for those of you hearing for the first time, I didn't really know about this till 2019 either. So once I figured that out, I went and looked at my portfolio, which was a combination of, stocks and bonds, because I at that point was heavily invested in that, and real estate. I had 2 properties at the point. And I realized that with $600,000 in my stock bond portfolio and with a 4% safe withdrawal rate, I was able to maybe get 24,000 in passive income annually, which was $2,000 a month. But my real estate portfolio, I had $200,000 invested in it. And I realized that my real estate was also super passive. Well, back then, I was only spending 15 minutes a month on my real estate portfolio. So we're looking at 2 very passive portfolios, right? Even though I owned these rental properties, I had a team taking care of it. With my real estate portfolio, with a third of the money invested, I was getting the same cash flow, but over time, and by 2019, I'd also built up $100,000 of equity in that portfolio, which I was able to take out once I did a cash out refi. So I realized that with a third of my money in real estate, I had twice as much of income coming in. And that was passive income also, because I wasn't super active in my portfolio. That's when I started doing a deep dive into real estate investing, because initially I was looking at my cash flow and I said, at $500 of cash flow a month, how is this ever going to get me to financial freedom? I need, at least $10,000 a month. So I wasn't really paying attention to it, but I realized that with real estate, yes, you have the cash flow, right? Which can be anywhere from 2 to 40%, depending on how you structure things. But let's say 10%, 5 to 10% is a good average, even in the current market, right? You also have debt paid on happening, which is where your tenants are paying down your mortgage, right? And the principal portion gets paid down. And so your equity in the property is increasing by 6% annually. You have market appreciation happening, which national historic averages for real estate appreciation is 3%. We know it was 20% in the last year, but we're only looking at historic averages around the country, and that's 3%. But when you have a property that is mortgaged and you only have 25% down, your ROI, because you're leveraged, actually is 4 times the 3%. So that's 12%, right? And I don't even factor in tax savings because that's variable depending on your personal situation. So even without factoring that in, for a simple buy and hold where you're not doing anything crazy, where you're not super active, you're getting upwards of 25% of annualized ROI, right? And the best part is that this 25% stays the same during growth and in retirement. If you can remember with a stock portfolio, you have 10% annualized ROI while the portfolio is growing. But in retirement, when you try to withdraw from it, you can only do 4%. This doesn't change for a real estate portfolio, right? And I have an example here for those of you who, it can be a little confusing when you look at those numbers just in isolation. So let's run an example, right? So this is a number, these are numbers I ran for my preferred market, which is Houston. So for a $200,000 single family home, you put $53,000 down, right? Which is 25% down and closing costs and stuff. And if you're renting it out for $1,800, your cash flow ends up being 8% ROI. So you're getting 8% ROI just from cash flow annually, right? And then you have debt pay down happening every year. And I actually calculated this numbers that ends up being 6%, right? 3,300. And market appreciation is 3% of the home price, which ends up being $6,000, which is 3% of $200,000. But remember, you didn't pay all cash for this. You only put $53,000 down. So your return on investment, because the home price increases by $6,000 every year, which gets added to the equity, your ROI ends up being 11%. So overall, annually, you're getting $13,500 from that property, which you just bought and you rented out without doing anything crazy. That's 25% ROI. This is without forcing appreciation or adding value. This is without any tax saving strategies that you could be using, right? With just this, you're getting 25% ROI. And like I said, with the stock portfolio, 10% during growth, but it goes down to 4% in retirement. And it's important to remember there's a distinction there, which again, for the longest time, I didn't realize there was a distinction. With real estate, you tend to have the same, the same ROI during growth and in retirement. And that's the best part. Okay. Now, the other thing, which again, I wasn't factoring in originally, is that real estate is your best hedge against inflation. And we are in a hyperinflationary market right now. So what happens is that over time, your rents increase, especially if you're investing in the right markets, in strong markets with good rent growth, good job growth, good population growth. Your rents increase, but your biggest fixed expense, which is your mortgage, stays steady, especially if you have those long-term fixed debt products. And so just to give you examples, this first property that I purchased in 2014, initially my cash flow was only $450 a month, but over time, because rents increased from $1,500 to $1,900, that cash flow increased to $800 a month. And so my ROI just from cash flow, just from the total positive cash flow I had in my hand at the end of the year after factoring in expenses, bumped up from 14% to 26%, right? So over time, your returns with real estate keep increasing significantly. And that's the important thing to remember. And that's why I like to say that although the traditional retirement model focuses more on saving more and reducing your annual expenses so you can get to retirement faster, I think what we need to shift in terms of the way we look at retirement is think about the return on investment of our investment vehicles. And if we can bump up that ROI significantly, that's how we get to financial freedom faster. And that's what I like to talk about. So just to show you an example, now you take the same person whose annual expenses are $10,000 a month or $120,000 a year, who's saving who's starting from scratch, right? No original portfolio to start with, but is putting in $2,000 every month towards their investments. If you bump the ROI to 40% during growth, and you can do this easily, if your cash flow increases to 25% over time, and you're building up equity in your properties, and you have debt pay down happening simultaneously, that can easily bump up your ROI. So that's 25% in cash flow, 12% plus 6%, another 20% in equity buildup from debt paydown and market appreciation easily takes you to over 40%, right? So, and your cash flow is at 25%, and if you're only thinking of tapping into your cash flow during retirement, we don't want to even touch your equity buildup, which you could, right? Then you're easily taking down the amount of time you need to get to retirement to close to 6 years, which is shaving 20 years off of retirement by investing in a vehicle that gives you higher return on investment. And then if you get super creative, you start using tax strategies, you start forcing appreciation by doing rehabs, and you're bumping up the ROI. And there are so many ways to do it. And we go into some of those examples as we go down the presentation. Once you're bumping up your ROI significantly, and if you're doubling the amount that you're saving, what you can then do is then get to retirement significantly faster within, say, 2 to 5 years, right? So that's the power of actually focusing on the ROI. And that's what I did myself, right? I educated myself. 2019, I realized I didn't want to be in a position where my income was not in my control. I wanted to have passive income covering all of my family's expenses. I educated myself. And then I had a 3-year goal. I said, within 3 years, I want to get to, $10,000 a month in passive income. And I was able to do it in 12 months while I was working full time. While I was taking care of my kids during the pandemic, when I had no childcare. My daughter didn't go to preschool. My son was doing online school. So it was a crazy time with no help, no cleaners, nothing. But by myself, within 12 months, I was able to get to financial independence. And I did it by building up my portfolio of long-term and short-term rentals in 2 domestic markets. I have some development projects abroad that I'm invested in. And I was able to shelter the majority of my clinical income from taxes. And my portfolio's to the point where now, within the last year, I quit my full-time position last year. And since I quit my full-time position, my portfolio in equity has increased by over $1 million. And that's with me doing nothing, right? So it just goes to show you the power of tapping into these various factors that contribute towards real estate returns. And the honest truth is that if I'd known 10 years ago what I do know now, and if I had used these same strategies 10 years ago when I got out of training and became an attending, it would have taken me literally a year to get to financial freedom. But it's not just the money you save, right? My net worth would be millions of dollars more, but it's the time, and I could have become financially free when my first child was born. So that's the power of knowledge, which is why I created Generational Wealth MD, just to help others accelerate to financial freedom. And the truth is that it's not a one size fits all, because for some people, long-term rentals may make sense. For some people, having a completely passive portfolio may make sense. For some people, it makes sense to be active and use tax strategies. And all of us can do it. If you're single, if you are married, you have a spouse who is a stay-at-home spouse, if you are a family of 2 physicians who are both working full-time, you can still tap into these strategies. And that's the point of this. And I talk about some of the strategies later on. And if anyone has questions about your unique situation, put them in the chat box, and we can go over them. But the whole point, the first step in building your portfolio is going to be, it's not going to be about finding, the team that's going to help you or thinking about those tax strategies. But the first step is going to be really knowing what your goals are. What are your passive income goals? How much time do you want to spend on your portfolio? Because if you're not very specific about this, it's going to be really hard to, you start off with this and then you build backwards, right? And another thing, and we're going to talk about this in detail, is you need to know what your resources are in terms of financing, what your risk appetite is, and this is going to determine how you pick your markets, what criteria you use. But I always say that the biggest thing in your strategy is always tapping into the right community and surrounding yourself with the right people. If you're here, you're already surrounding yourself with the right people, you're educating yourself, and that's amazing. But mentorship and community is so important in motivating you to get your goals, but also in connecting you to the right resources. So in terms of passive income goals, I always say, write it down. And, I would say 2 years ago, if someone told me to write it down, I probably would not have given it a second thought. But the truth is that having a vision board and actually putting pen to paper makes a huge difference. If you're listening, and if you can't do it right now, afterwards, sit down with your spouse, a significant other. If it's just you, sit down and write down where you want to be in terms of passive income for 5 years from now, how much time you want to be spending on your portfolio 5 years from now, and then work backwards, right? That's what we're doing, because what we want to do is work smarter. For some of you, it may be, and then the other big thing is to remember why you want to do this, right? For some people, it's time freedom. You want to have more time. So passive income may just mean you're, cutting back at work. But for some of you may not want to cut back at work. It may be about security, job security. Especially if you're a single income owner, you want to have that security, because if you don't go into work, you still want to have the money come in, just in case your circumstances change. For some of you, it may be about autonomy, to give you to be in a position where you can say no to the things that you want to say no to. It may be about starting a new career. It may be about shifting, transitioning, whatever it is, right? Paying less in taxes, or even paying it forward, whatever it is. Really write down what your why is, because I think when you get stuck, it's really nice to go back to that vision board and to think about what your goals are, why you want to do it. And that really helps you push through those periods when you feel overwhelmed or stuck. So we talked about this. And then again, the retirement calculator is available on the Generational Wealth MD site in the resources section. And the reason I keep coming back to that is because for a big part for me, which jump-started my journey, which gave me the momentum, was really understanding where I was and how long it would take me to get to financial freedom if I continued to do what I was doing in 2019 without making any shifts. And I realized it would take me 17, I put my numbers into the calculator, it would have taken me 17 years to do it, just doing what I was doing at that point. And I wasn't willing to wait 17 years to get to financial freedom. So just write those things down and run your numbers. I think that has huge impact. So when you're thinking about goals, I also want you to think about time horizon. And we talked about this. And the reason this is important is because if you have a long time horizon, then you can invest in markets where you're banking on appreciation and not cash flow, right? But if you have a shorter time horizon, then you may want to use some advanced strategies like doing rehabs, investing in short-term rentals, really using leverage to help you grow so you can get to those goals much faster. And it's really important to think about this, really hone in on this before you start investing, because I find that people get stuck sometimes because they haven't really given this much thought, and they just start modeling the person they're seeing, and that may not necessarily be their path. So really be intentional about it. I want to talk about people, how much time you're spending on your portfolio. And this works out from two different angles, right? You really need to know how much time you can spend on your portfolio to form a plan, but it also helps those who feel like, well, I want to invest in real estate, but it's just too much time and I don't have time for anything else on my plate. And I want to show how in real estate, the truth is that you can shift your strategy at any point. You can be super passive, even if you directly own real estate. And this is how I was the first few years I was investing in real estate. I had an out-of-state team. I was completely hands-off. They were taking care of everything. I was spending less than, honestly, guys, I was spending 15 minutes a month on my portfolio. And that it still gave me significantly higher returns. It gave me over 25% annualized ROI, which is significantly higher than what your stock portfolio gives you when you're looking at historic returns. So we're not talking about year-on-year return, historic returns, right? So it was still significantly higher, and this persists during retirement, right? And so you can do that. You can be super passive, or you can be super active. And I chose to do this in 2020 and 2021. I chose to be a little more active. I was spending up to 15 hours a week on my portfolio, and you can do that with rehabs, with short-term rentals. The reason I did it is because it let me tap into advanced tax strategies, and it significantly boosted my ROI. So my portfolio returns were greater than 40% in those years because I was being super active. So it's a trade-off, right? So you get to pick what you want to do, but even when you're super passive in real estate, and again, you can shift between strategies at any point, as long as, if you're trying to get the tax advantages every calendar year, you need to make sure your strategy works for that calendar year. But otherwise, even with the passive strategy, your returns are 2 to 3 times what you get with the stock portfolio. And that's the important thing to remember. And that persists in retirement. So you can do it even when you think you don't have a lot of time. You can choose to structure it accordingly. The next thing is about financing. And I think you need to think about financing when you think about your strategy, because for someone who has $500,000 to deploy and scale from there, that strategy is going to be very different from someone who wants to start with little to no money. And honestly, the truth is that you can invest in real estate with little to no money. And I always say this, like, I, especially for those who have little time and little money, my question to you is, how are you? So if you're going to use the traditional retirement model and invest in stocks, you have to either work harder to get to financial freedom, or and it's going to take you that much longer if you have less in savings to invest into the market. So for those of you with less time and less money, real estate is a super effective vehicle, because you can use other people's money, you can use leverage. That's when you're getting a mortgage on the property, right? And there are so many other tools in creative financing that I'm going to go over a few of them in the next few slides that help you invest in real estate even if you don't have a lot of money, right? You have the ability to use tax savings and recycle the same pot of money to get to financial freedom. You can add value, so many things you can do with real estate that make it a super powerful tool, even for those who don't have a lot of money. So I'm just going to go over 3 examples in terms of how you can use creative financing with real estate. If you have less money for a down payment, you can invest in markets where home prices are significantly lower. So essentially your down payment gets lower. So that would be like the Midwest states. Texas has small homes that are, homes are more affordable. So that's one way to go in with lower initial equity. Another big way, and a lot of our members within Creating Generational Freedom, what they do is they get short-term rentals with, when you can get owner-occupied financing, you're able to go in with lower down payments, right? Because you can do anywhere from, if you're house hacking, where you're living in the home and renting out a portion of it, you can do 3 to 5% in down payments. If you get a second home, a vacation home as a second home, you can again use owner occupied financing and put 10% down. So that again decreases the amount of money you need to get started. So just showing you how many options you have, and obviously can't get into everything, but we're going to talk about a few of those things. And then again, people like using HELOCs, cash out refinances, just tapping into other sources of equity and using that money to get into real estate. And you can do this with joint ventures, where you're the person who's bringing the sweat equity in, somebody else is bringing in the down payment. And another thing I really like is this strategy with real estate where you're forcing appreciation, or it's also called value add, or the BRRRR strategy, where you're doing a rehab. And in this example, I'm just going to give you a few numbers. So suppose the property is worth $400,000 and you can rent it for $2,250. You now, you suppose you put 25% down and your equity in the property is $100,000 and you take a loan for $300,000. If you put $50,000 to rehab this property, and again, you really need to know how to run your numbers to do this accurately, but if you pick the right property and you're putting $50,000 in, you end up having $150,000 of your own money in the property after you've done the rehab. The loan stays fixed, but if you are able, and you've done this strategically, you're able to increase the value of the property from $400,000 to $550,000. You now have increased this excess equity in the property of $100,000 that you can tap into. You can pull this out with a cash out refinance, and then you can go ahead and do the same process all over again, right? In the process, what also happens is that you're able to command higher rents or higher daily rates if it's a short-term rental, and you're just increasing your returns. You're increasing, you're again recycling your money, pulling the money out and reusing it. So just creative strategies that you can deploy with real estate investing. This is an example of a short-term rental where I like doing my rehabs myself without a general contractor, just because it boosts my returns. But again, you could be completely hands-off and hand this over to someone and have them do it for you. Again, your returns may go down, but yeah, there's so many different ways of doing this. And this is how I think I have an example. Well, I have an example with the actual numbers for my first rehab to show you how I was able to pull all that money out and recycle the money. But the next thing you think about when you're thinking about your strategy is also risk, right? And the biggest way to reduce risk is educating yourself and really tapping into the right teams. But I want to go over one slide where I talk about how you can pick different strategies. And it's not like one size fits all. There are different strategies that anyone can pick depending on their risk appetite. So I just wanted to show you an example. Members, and I hear this all the time, The real estate market is hot. Interest rates are going up. I don't think I want to get into the market now because it's too risky. I hear this a lot. And the truth is that if you educate yourself, if you're picking the right properties and you have the right strategy and you know how to run your numbers, you can do it even in a hot market. All of our members are going in really hot markets and they're locking in deals because they're running their numbers right. So just for those of you who are trying to formulate your strategy, I want to talk about the really lower risk strategies versus the higher risk strategies. Again, it's a game of risk and reward. And again, I want to emphasize that even when you pick a strategy that is lower risk, you are getting significantly higher risks, higher returns than you are by investing in the stock market. So what I like to say is like your typical buy and hold strategies where you're buying something that's a rent ready, you're not going in, you're not doing any rehab. You have that's called stabilized residential, especially if it's a long-term rental, especially if you're picking class A minus and B properties, just means that the properties are nicer properties where you get better tenants. So there's less risk involved in it. That's a good way to lower risk in your portfolio. You can also do this when you get a long-term fixed loan product, like something with a 30-year fixed, a fixed interest rate loan product that, again, there's no variable over there. You're not thinking about refinancing or selling in 5 years. So all of that really reduces risk. Now, where do people get stuck up? A lot of people do short-term rentals. There's a slightly higher risk in short-term rentals because of regulations, and then it's not risk, it's a business. So when the economy has a downturn, you may see a little drop in returns. So there's some risk with that. When you're doing a rehab, like I was talking about, there are so many variables you need to factor in. You really need to make sure you understand your numbers right. When you're doing ground up developments, again, there are a lot of variables over there. Retail space and office space really didn't do great during the pandemic, but they tend to have more fluctuations. So they can give you higher reward. Same thing with properties that are older and in maybe neighborhoods that aren't that new. Those are called class C and D properties. They can give you higher returns, but they're also slightly higher risk because I think during the pandemic, that's where most people had issues with collecting rents. Maintenance can be, and tenant turnover can be higher over there. And so it's important to remember that when you go for those higher return strategies, you may be taking a little more risk, and you as an investor have the option to pick what makes the most sense for your portfolio. And that's what I wanted to stress on. When we're talking about risk reward, I want to quickly talk about sequence of return risk, because most of us are hybrid investors. We have a stock portfolio and we hopefully have some real estate. And for those of you who already know this, the sequence of return risk talks about what happens to your stock portfolio if you intend to live off of it for the next 30 or 40 years, right? So assuming you're retiring on a stock portfolio, the red line is, suppose the first few years after you retire and you start withdrawing from your portfolio, you see a bear market. When you see a bear market in the first few years, that portfolio is going to last you anywhere from 7 to 10 years less than it would have if you had a bull market right after you start withdrawing from it. So suppose you retire and you see a bull market, that portfolio is going to do pretty good. That stock portfolio is going to do great. But this is what happened to a lot of my attendings during the 07, 08 stock market crash. People who were supposed to retire decided to prolong how much they were going to work, because if they had retired then, their stock portfolio would not have been able to sustain them throughout retirement, right? So you see the sequence of return risk with the stock portfolio. Now, what happens with the rental real estate portfolio? And people talk to me about this all the time. They're like, Param, what if the stock market, what if the real estate market crashes because prices are at an all-time high? And I want to draw your attention to the fact that if you have a good cash flowing property and you have a long-term strategy, what you have to remember is that even this the red line is home prices during the market crash 07, 08. And the dark blue line is what happened to rents across the country. Rents don't drop. I think they dropped 4% in 08. They dropped another 4-5% in 09. This is nationally, averages across the country. And then they started going up suddenly. So as long as you have a cash flowing property, you don't see the same drops in rent. And that's all you need to be concerned about. So when you're thinking about risk, I wanted to highlight these points so that it helps people make decisions. Okay. And so as Warren Buffett says, risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. When you educate yourself, you're doing a good job. Okay. We're talking about market next. Sujin, did you want to stop briefly to take some questions, or should we just keep going?
I don't see anything in the chat box.
Okay.
Any questions, you guys? Otherwise, we can go. I was about to, I have a couple questions, but you're covering most of it, so I'll save my questions to the end.
Awesome. I'm going to talk quickly about implementation and momentum and then try to wrap it up quickly. Okay. For those of you thinking market selection, right? I wanted to give a few pointers over here. The biggest question is always going to be, do I invest locally or out of state? And a few pointers over there is, if you're living in a state where your local market homes are affordable, it's a landlord friendly state, and you have strong job growth, industry diversification, and rent growth over there, then that's a good market to invest in. But if any of those things is not happening over there, and you want to move to invest in a place where homes are more affordable, then pick a state that's landlord friendly, because overall that's going to really affect your returns in the event that you need to have an eviction, or you anytime you are in a landlord friendly state, all of those your interactions with your tenants is going to be so much more simpler, and it affects your bottom line. So pick a state that's landlord friendly. Look into migration trends. Citydata.com is a great source for free information on how that market has performed in the last 10 years. So if you're looking for market data information, that's a good resource to tap into. And I think that's how you pick those numbers. And for those of you who are trying to run numbers for your local market, and you're like, okay, I don't know how to run numbers, I have a blog post on Generational Wealth MD about running numbers. And I have a free calculator for long-term and short-term rentals that you can go to the resources section and plug your numbers in over there. When you do that, you will see if that property is cash flowing or not, and you can use it to compare different markets. That's a good place to start. And then when you're picking markets, always look to see if it's a market that has good cash flow versus a market that has great appreciation but no cash flow, and then a hybrid market is somewhere in between, and see how that fits into your overall portfolio. So that's kind of going back to your goals essentially, right? And then I say, if you're trying to invest out of state, always look at the team. And I say, like, it's like work backwards with your goals. Write down your goals first, and then work 5-year goals, and then work backwards. It's the same thing with your team. I want you to figure out where, especially if you're going out of state, figure out where there are great teams in place, and then work backwards from there and try to build your portfolio there. Because I've seen people get burnt when they try to build their own teams from scratch. If you don't have that track record, it can be a little challenging. Okay. What else? Yes, and then again, market selection is going to be very different for long-term and short-term rentals. So if anyone has questions, just put them in the chat box, and then I can get to them.
Hey, Param, there's a question. The resources to figure out which states are landlord friendly. Do you have any resources?
Yes, the one that I can remember off the top of my head is nolo.com, NOLO.com, and they have an article about landlord friendly states, and they kind of list down every state and their and the ones that are landlord friendly. But off the top of my head, the Sun Belt, which tends to be Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Arizona, they tend to be very landlord friendly. Georgia, did I say Georgia? Yeah, Georgia also. Okay, so in terms of the first part, right, when we're thinking about our strategy, I think this is the last one, really narrowing down your criteria. You want to know if you want to invest in single family versus multifamily, commercial real estate, long-term versus short-term rental. If you pick the class of property you want to invest in, what condition you want the property in, what price you want it to be in. So if you're going to go talk to a real estate agent, I usually say, really know what your goals are in terms of all of these criteria. Don't really have time to go into all of this, but really knowing all of this makes you sound like an informed investor when you go to an investor agent. And then it also makes it easier for them to help set you up with the right listing, so you can come up with a property without putting too much effort into it. Okay, so and then before ending the portion on strategy, I want to remind you that, again, it's the people you're surrounding yourself with, right? So mentorship and community is so important, because we are the average of the people we surround ourselves with. So if you are there, we have Generational Wealth MD has a Facebook group. There are other Facebook groups, other resources, communities that you can tap into where there are people doing the same thing. I always recommend doing this. It helps on multiple levels. I've noticed this even within the program, people come in with a spouse who isn't on board, possibly, or they're not absolutely sure, but when they come in and they see people doing it, and they see the impact it's having on other people and how they're able to make progress, it really does transform the way people think about investing. So yeah, so it's really important. Mentorship and community is really important. Okay, so moving on to implementation. I'm going to go through this really quickly, but I think the biggest roadblock for people with implementation is teams, having the right team, because the right team is going to really cut down the amount of time you spend on your portfolio in terms of even the amount of time you're trying to find that property and then helping you run numbers for it and then help you manage it down the line. So the teams are really important. It's like they say, like Dan Sullivan says in his book, it's who, not how. It's not, okay, how do I run numbers? How do I, and sometimes we get stuck up in the how, but it's about who's going to help do that for you, right? And a good investor agent is really critical, especially if you're investing out of state. I've had agents who are out of state. Some of them will see a crack in the foundation, which I cannot see as an out of state investor. And they're my eyes and ears on the ground. And they'll be like, no problem. This is what it is. This is how much it's going to cost. So you tell me if you want to do it or not. And sometimes they'll, really help me make that decision. But there are other people who will see huge power lines right next to the home and will not even mention it. I have to go on Google Maps and do the 3D view to be able to figure that out. So your team is really going to make a huge difference, and I can't emphasize that enough. And a team, and what I learned over time is that your team is not just your agent and property manager. I mean, yes, your mentor, I think, is a big part of your team, but it's also your lender, insurance broker. But more importantly, having a good real estate focused CPA and a good real estate attorney is also important. They're really important parts, especially if you're trying to tap into those advanced tax strategies. Oh, and an important point I like to make is that if you're spending more than 2 hours a week on your portfolio, even if you're trying to be, unless you're really trying to do it for the tax savings part of it, if you're managing short-term rentals or long-term rentals, more than 2 hours a week means there's room for optimization. You shouldn't be doing that unless you're actively doing it for the tax strategies. And I want to talk quickly about accidental landlords, people who get stuck with properties which weren't originally supposed to be investment properties, and they struggle with it. A big reason is because they may be cash flow negative, and the price to rent ratio is not accurate. It may be in a market which is not the best rental market, and they can it can be very frustrating. But when you're starting off the right way, you're running your numbers right, then you shouldn't find yourself in those positions. Okay. As far as numbers, I don't want to take up too much time, but for anyone looking for those free calculators, again, for long-term and short-term rentals, they're available in the resources section. But the important thing to remember is that you want a property, for most people, with your strategy, and for some people it may make sense to buy those cash flow negative properties and look for appreciation, but for most of us, you want a property that's cash flow positive. There are a lot of metrics you need to look at. There are a lot of ways to boost returns. I'm going to go over 2 examples later. There are so many ways to find a property that may seem like it's not making sense to actually make those numbers work, because you have strategies to boost returns, like finding the hidden value in a property, negotiating better, I'll talk about tax strategies and rehabs later on, but it's always helpful to stress test your deals a little bit. So be a little conservative with your numbers, so that you don't find yourself in hot soup later on. As far as boosting returns is concerned, the whole point, and I really like talking about boosting returns, because we don't think about this when you're starting off with your first property, but over time, and if you are learning the right strategies, boosting your portfolio returns, you can do this, and you can be very active with this in your real estate portfolio. You can boost returns from 25% annualized ROI all the way up to 70% or 100% in a given year. What that does is that it lets you use less money to get to financial independence faster. And so this is where the fun part begins with real estate investing. And so my mentor, the first person who got me interested in real estate investing, who was my colleague right after I got out of training, what took him 12 years to get to, I was able to do in 12 months. And just the reason I say that is because this is so powerful, and that's where all these strategies come into play. I'm going to talk about 2 of those strategies later on. Quickly about asset protection. For those of you who do have properties or are considering starting, people get stuck up thinking they want to start an LLC first and then buy the property. Remember, in most situations, unless you're buying a property all cash or getting commercial lending, it may make sense to just buy the property in your name, and then you can create the LLC later on. That doesn't have to be the step that's stopping you. And for those of you who you don't necessarily always need an LLC, it's going to vary depending on your situation. If you don't have an LLC that you place in the property, and at least make sure you have an umbrella insurance policy, and make sure you place your investment property under that policy so that you're getting the adequate coverage. Okay, good record keeping. So these are all part of implementation, right? When you're talking about implementation, you want to make sure from day one you're maintaining good records. Then not only does that audit proof you, it saves you dollars. And this is where a good CPA and really education also helps, because I've lost tens of thousands of dollars because my CPA and me, we were both initially not savvy with record keeping. And since then I've taken tax courses and accounting courses, and I do a better job at it. And this is what I teach also. But remember that it's really important to maintain those logs, because it could save you tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in the long run. I've seen people who don't carry forward passive losses when they're doing their Schedule E. I've seen people who don't take partial asset disposition, which is like a loss you can take in the year that you do a rehab or replace something in your home, where you could save, you can shelter thousands of dollars of your clinical income from taxes. So these things do matter. For those of you who are starting out, using an Excel sheet at least to start maintaining. If you don't want to get fancy with QuickBooks Online, using Excel really writing down your expenses really helps. But the important thing is that with real estate, it's a business. So you get all those deductions that you get for any business, like you can get with a business vehicle or with traveling or with paying kids. When you do that, you can income shift, and instead of paying 50% marginal taxes, you're transferring income to your child, who then pays zero in income taxes up to a certain amount. So I have a blog post on how to maximize tax deductions for real estate investors. Feel free to go and take a look at that for more information. But let's move on to the last part. So we talked about strategy. We talked about how to really implement it and take it to the next level. And I really want to finish off with momentum, because we don't really think about this so much, but there is so much power in momentum. And this is actually from Tom Wheelwright's book on taxes, where people talk about compound interest being the eighth wonder of the world, and it's so amazing. And yes, I get it. But with real estate, you're really able to tap into leverage, which really boosts your returns. You saw how it 4x returns. And then when you're doing rehabs and value adding, you're adding momentum to your strategy and really increasing returns over there. But then when you're using tax reduction strategies, that's like another way of supercharging your return. So I'm going to show you one example where I use 3 different strategies to boost returns, and then we'll wrap it up. But this is like, remember the original slide where we said annualized ROI can be 25%. This is how with momentum, you're boosting those annualized ROIs to anywhere up to 100%. So when you use short-term rentals and when you're doing rehabs, you can boost cash flow up to 40% or more. Right. And then, as you know, over time, that cash flow itself increases over time, just because of rents appreciating and inflation happening. And then we talked about leverage with market appreciation, but forcing appreciation is when you do a rehab. And I showed you that example where you can suddenly create equity and increase your rents, right? So forcing appreciation adds another boost over there. And then with tax strategies, I'm going to show you how you can add like 50 to 90% to your ROI just from tax strategies. So when you're doing this, you can really supercharge returns. So this one example, this is a short-term rental that I acquired in 2020 when I was working full-time, right? So I wasn't able to, with the long-term rental, you need to meet certain other criteria to get the tax savings. But with a short-term rental, you can do this as a single individual when you're working full-time, as long as you meet criteria for material participation. So what I did was I went ahead and I did a rehab on this property. I put $25,000 in. So this is where I used that BRRRR strategy, where I'm doing a rehab and adding momentum. After that, the property appraised for $480,000. The property is now worth $520,000. It's just going up. But anyways, so right after the rehab, it was worth $480,000. So I was able to command higher rents, but this was a short-term rental. So my average daily rate had bumped up. I did a cash out refi. And so I didn't actually pull out this much, but technically you could, with short-term rentals, you can leave 10% equity in and pull out the rest. And then because I was able to materially participate, so I spent significant time on the property, and in that year, I self-managed it. You don't have to do it the following year. You could use the tax strategies for each individual calendar year and then become more passive in your portfolio over time, even in the next year, right? So typically, if you do this like end of the year, you're really active in your portfolio for in that short-term rental for 3 or 4 months, and then you can just switch to a more passive strategy. But because of the rehab and between everything, I was able to shelter $250,000 of clinical income from taxes that year, which meant a post-tax saving of over $87,000. And that's because I live in California. I don't get a state tax benefit from this. In some states, you're able to save more because you get a federal and state tax benefit. So overall, if you look at this, I pulled out more money than I put into that property in that year. So my ROI is over 100% in that given year. but that property continues to cash flow, have debt pay down, and have market appreciation. And so that's the power of really using those strategies for momentum, right? So with rehabs, I don't want to go into this. This may be too much information, but really with rehabs, you want to make sure you are really really know your numbers. You know what your rent forecast is going to be, what your budget is going to be, and what your after repair value is going to be. And again, even with rehabs, right? The first one took me 3 months, but once I learned how to do this, once I knew what materials to pick and how to really do this, it can take us little as 3 weeks. And there are systems you can put in place so that this doesn't become overwhelming. And I did this when I was working full-time and my kids were little. So it can totally be done. And I did it all by myself without a general contractor, but you can do it very differently with the whole team where you can be completely hands-off. You get to pick and choose is essentially what the bottom line is. Okay. Tax strategies. So we talked about one way with short-term rentals and how you can save on taxes. There are so many amazing benefits of tax strategies that real estate has that we don't have time to go into, but so many ways to shelter it. I just want to give you this example where one of our members got a short-term rental last year, and I think he put down so it was a short-term rental. If you look at the bottom over here, that was worth $365,000, and he put $36,000 down. But once he, at the end of the year, because he used the same strategies, he used the tax strategies that I talked about, he was able to shelter $121,000 of clinical income from taxes, which meant that he got $52,000 post-tax dollar savings. And he was like, wow, this is another down payment. That's what it is. That's the power of recycling your money, right? And that's what I want. That's how I want you to look at it. Short-term rentals, not going to go into it. I will wrap it up because you guys may have questions. I don't want to have time for questions. But overall, what we're trying to do is we're thinking about strategy first, and you start off with your goals and you pick a market based on your risk profile, and then you really think about your criteria. You also surround yourself with the right people. Then you move on to implementation, right? And implementation, I think the biggest part is finding the right team who's going to make this very as hands-off for you as you need it to be. And then you add momentum with all these strategies that we talked about. And that's it. And I want to talk quickly about limiting beliefs. And so for those of you who are thinking, yes, but you know what, it's too risky. This is not the right market. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I look back at my own journey, and honestly, like 2010, 2011, when I was introduced to this, when I was introduced to the right teams by my mentor and was asked to start investing, I had more time. I actually had more disposable income in my hand at that point. And the market was great. So the thing which stopped me, and the thing which stops most of us, it's never the time, money, or the risk in the market. Oftentimes it's just not being very clear about our goals. And how important this is to us, which is why I always go back to write down your why and write down why this is important to you and write down those goals so that you can actually make it a reality. And so if you're overwhelmed, just take it one step at a time. We talked about the sequence of steps. Just start off with a strategy and take it from there and surround yourself with the right people. The goal of this whole presentation is to shift that time where you go off financial freedom from your 60s and 70s to hopefully your 40s and 50s. So you're able to, make choices where where money isn't the primary consideration, right? That's the whole goal. And then, yes, the creating generational freedom is my 8-week program. And if you guys have any questions about that, I'm free to answer. But yeah, we're at the end of this presentation. Okay.
You know what, Param, thank you so much. So this is actually, you teach in 8 weeks. You're trying to do it in 15 minutes.
I know. And I like giving little pointers to everyone that, if you're just starting out, use Excel for this. But yeah, so it's a lot of material to be able to do it right. But that being said, there's a lot of free, there's a lot of free information out there for people who want to do it. And for people who are doing it to just streamline the process.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, its information has so much value, but it could be overwhelming for the people who is not familiar with the certain terms, like a BRRRR. Somebody may not know what it is, but if you are interested, you can always go back to her website. Or your course starts when?
April? The 3rd of April. So we're going to start in, I think it's 2 weeks from now, right? So we have one weekend, that's spring break and stuff, and we're starting the following weekend.
I see. Okay, so we have a question. I don't know, Param, if you can sit in the chat box.
I can see it.
Yeah, I can read it. So Monica, she's a beginner thinking of starting with 25 to 50K next 3 to 4 months as a single mom with full-time job. The time is limited right now. I can agree with you. Would love to grow in the next 2 to 5 years as kids grow. Located in the Massachusetts, what is the best strategy for me? That's like a general question. A lot of people ask about what's the best strategy, where should I invest, and what kind of a, you know, how active, how passive, long-term rental, short-term rental, mid-term rental.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have some advice for her.
Yeah, absolutely, Monica. And so Massachusetts, we have a few members from there. So that the first question you have to ask yourself is so start working off of those goals. And remember, you can keep it as passive as you want to. The only time you go more active is if you want to do it to get higher returns. Right. So we have a few members in our community who are single moms who towards the end of the year wanted to do those short-term rentals just because they want the higher returns and they want the tax savings. But again, that's a choice that you make. 25 to 50K is pretty much 25K is the minimum if you want to use normal strategies for financing without getting creative. So I think you're in the right ballpark over there. And you want to start within the next 3 to 4 months. I think in terms of time frame and finances, you're fine. You don't even need to go into creative financing strategies. But I would start off by saying maybe breaking it down into what your passive income goal is going to be for the next 12 months. That's a good place to start, and say how many hours a week do you want to be spending on your portfolio. So for some single full-time physicians, the goal is to also shelter taxes. So they will say, as long as, so with a short-term rental, you can do a short-term rental. That's going to be more time intensive, especially the first 6 weeks that you're setting things up. But there are ways around it. You may end up picking a property which is completely furnished already. We have some members who do that, and then they're not, then it's simpler. So you're not going to spin your wheels trying to furnish the property, right? So you could do that. With a short-term rental, you could put 10% down. So with the financing that you have available to you, that's still a doable option and gives you higher cash flow. And it also gives you the opportunity to shelter in taxes when you're using, when you're being intentional about how you log your hours and stuff. So you could easily do that with a short-term rental with 10% down. And I would recommend doing that maybe starting June, July is when you would start looking, because then it's easier for you to meet those material participation criteria. So which helps you get the tax savings, right? So you could do a short-term rental starting and start looking for it, say around May, June. So you kind of understand which market you want to go into. You would pick, based on your financing, you would pick markets where properties are priced a little lower. And so Massachusetts, I don't know if you live around Boston, because we have a member around Boston, we ran numbers in that area. Property prices are significantly higher. I think it's hard in most submarkets to find a property that's under $500,000. And so Boston, Massachusetts tends to be an appreciation market. It's hard to find good cash flow there also. So if that's something that's not aligned with your goals, if you're willing to do it for appreciation, that's fine. If it's not aligned with your goals, then I would consider out-of-state investment for 2 reasons. A, you can have a lower down payment and you can buy a long-term rental. With 25 to 50K, you could easily do that. You would get cash flow. And if you're using a market where where you could tap into someone else's teams, then you're able to be completely hands-off in that, right? So you have the ability to do that. So I think those would be the two things. And within the program, you have access to multiple teams in multiple markets. But if you're starting out and a friend or a family member who's been doing this, you could piggyback onto their teams, and that's a great way to get started also. So I hope that answers the question. So yeah, so Monica, I see the follow-up question is, so, and I think I wasn't very clear about this. When you do a short-term rental, the first 4 to 6 weeks can be more time intensive because you're setting it up on Airbnb, you're making sure the little final touches are there, and you could reduce that by buying a fully furnished property, which is very doable in a short-term rental market. And you can just list on Airbnb initially without going crazy. But then after those first 4 weeks, ideally you want to and you have systems in place so you're automating the process and not spending more than 2 hours a week on your short-term rental. So, and that's usually doable for most people, right? Per week.
So she commented afraid of maintenance issues. Param, can you share your experience, how you manage, short-term rental cleanings and maintenance handyman?
Yeah,
can you
absolutely.
share?
And so So, and I'll talk about syndication also afterwards. With the long-term rentals, when I was telling you that, and even with my local long-term rentals, I started off self-managing them, where I would go, and if I had to be leased out, I would go show the property, and I would reach out to the handyman if the tenant had issues. And I realized I did not want to be doing it, so I got a property manager in place, and that's how you handle all those maintenance issues. And that's why I say the team is so important, because if you have a great team who does property management for you, they will take care of everything, and you can set a number limit where you can tell them, and you can, this is completely based on your comfort level. If it's an expense under $200, do not contact me, take care of it, and just send me the invoice at the end of the year, and they will do it for you. And this is how good property management works. With time, you can bump that number up to $500, so you're getting fewer and fewer calls, and you're not getting involved. And sometimes if you have a good property management team, even if it's like I think in Texas, when if you guys remember, there was a period when there was like a winter frost where everything got frozen and the pipes burst and stuff. I had no issues because my property management team was taking care of it. They will take care of it. They will keep you informed, but they will do everything for you, including winterizing and stuff. So that team is really important for management. And with a short-term rental, the two people that you're going to rely on if you're self-managing to get those tax savings and to get higher returns are going to be your cleaner and your handyman. And I always say have two handymen, always have a backup handyman also. With a cleaner, it's good to have a backup person, but from a logistical point of view, it may be kind of hard to have two people running the property at the same time. But when you have those systems set up, that's it. That takes a lot of I don't want to hear about a sprinkler bursting or or anything else happening. I want my property management team to take care of it. And that's how you should have it set up, especially as a single mom with kids. I mean, we don't want to be doing that. With syndication, I want to quickly touch upon that because I see that in your question. Now, syndications are great because all you need to do is vet a team. You just vet the sponsor essentially. And if you have a good sponsor, they're investing in good deals, and then you're putting your money in there. You do need to do a little bit of due diligence over there also in terms of making sure that they've stress tested the deal really well, and then it's a strong market and the numbers make sense. And so I feel like the way I have it set up with my out-of-state investment is very similar, because I just start off with a great team, and then I don't look at the MLS. They bring the property to me. The entire acquisition of a property takes me 2 hours for the entire acquisition, from the point when I'm shown a property to when I say yes to it, to the point I close on it. It takes 2 hours. So that's really not a lot of time if you look at it. So if you've set it up right, it shouldn't take you more time. The advantage is to direct ownership, and this is just my perspective, right? So always get your information from multiple sources. But my perspective is you don't get any tax savings. So with syndications, it all stays in the passive bucket. And so when they exit within 5 to 7 years, you have to pay back all the taxes. So you're not able to shelter your clinical income from taxes. That doesn't happen. Your cash flow is sheltered from taxes, and that is till the exit happens. Once the exit happens, then again, you're paying back all those taxes, right? So the tax benefits is one. The other thing is control. I really know which markets to pick, and I can build my own portfolio and strategize it based on what's right for me at any given time. Higher returns, because with a syndication, you get 8% cash flow typically, and 15 to 17% IRR. And with direct ownership, your cash flow, like I showed you, increases over time just because of inflation. So you're getting much higher in cash flow over the period of this, the hold. Your returns are significantly higher. So your buy and hold return for a buy and hold where you're doing nothing fancy is still going to be slightly higher than a syndication with value add. And then when you start getting creative with tax strategies and stuff, your returns are bumped up. And then I feel like risk is slightly lower for me with lending, because I have fixed long-term debt as opposed to syndications where it's a 5 to 7 year hold. So if there's a market shift, then they need to exit, and there's a slightly higher risk over there. So that's the way I look at syndications, as being an LP in a syndication. Is the ROI after excluding team, hold on. After excluding team expenses, as that costs a lot. Yeah. So the ROI is factored in after team for long-term rentals, property management. And so within the community, we've negotiated rates because a bunch of us go in as a group. So it's anywhere from, so some people will property manage for a fixed flat rate of $100, $200 a month, or even $0, depending on the team. And they will just take a leasing fee every time they lease the property, right? Because you're working with them. So it can be anywhere from 1 to 2% all the way to 10 to 15%. And so that's usually factored in. And ideally you want to work with someone who doesn't charge too much, but with long-term rental, that's not a huge expense at all. That's easily factored into the equation. And that's what these numbers are, where these numbers are coming. With short-term rentals, if you're self-managing, you can see anywhere from 30 to 40% returns in cash flow. Property management tends to be more expensive for short-term rentals. So it's anywhere from 15 to 30%, depending on the team. And so there, then you have to really factor that in, and which is why I say if you can self-manage and spend less than 2 hours a week, then that makes more sense.
Thank you. Yeah, your answer is really comprehensive, and so syndication, I think I'm gonna have a guest speaker about syndication in maybe May. April, we have a talk about financial investing strategy with Dr. Yen that we did a financial planning last month, and then this is the second talk. Third one is his second series, and then we're gonna have a syndication, so you can do that. But I highly recommend be around the people who is doing this work. This is not something that I can just look at the book and do it.
Yes.
I learned it.
It's overwhelming.
Before I took the course, I thought I knew. I read a lot of books and podcasts and everything, but I really cannot pull the trigger.
Yeah,
that's why I took her course, and it made me move forward. Considering the return of investment, how much you're gonna get, how much money you're gonna actually make even this year, how much tax you're gonna save if you invest in real estate, if you're ready. Taking a course like $2,000, $3,000, it's actually, it may sound a lot of money, but if you think about all the benefit you can get once you take the course, you can continue to invest. It's really beneficial. I mean, I'm not selling the course. I don't have a course to sell. Param does, but I highly believe.
Yeah, honestly,
around the people.
I think about it too, and I was like, if I had the foresight to do something, to actually educate myself 10 years ago, I would have paid like $100,000, because if you look at the long-term return, it's like significantly high. Yeah. Emily was saying, I know, I'm so sorry, Emily. I tried to slow down. I actually did try to intentionally slow down. And a lot of it is the abbreviations can be a little confusing, but I was trying to keep it exciting for people who already have some properties and people who don't know anything. So it was like hard to find that balance. But yes, what I always did when I was learning was just Google it. It's so easy to just Google it, and the information is right there. So like Sujin was saying, the BRRRR strategy means buy a property, B for buy, R for rehab, R for refinance when you pull the money out, and then R for rent it out after that. And then the next R is for repeating the process. So it's just the whole cycle essentially.
All right. Any other questions? I think we're already 6:10. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.